one of them split off, and then Omer and his friend were together, and they kind of went up a hill because they saw some deer up a hill. So they're kind of climbing this hill, and my grandfather's in front, and he turns back to his friend behind him and says, "Shh, I've got a deer in my sight." So the friend stays back a bit. He sees my grandfather go over the hill, and then he hears a gunshot.
Stories That Live in Us is a podcast that inspires you to form deep connections with your family, past, present, and future. I'm Krista Cowan, known online as the Barefoot Genealogist. I've spent my whole life discovering the power of family history, and I know that sharing the stories that live in you can change everything. Who doesn't love cake? I mean, I love cake. And cemeteries. I know, it seems like an odd pairing, but my guest today has lots to say about both. Before I introduce her, I've been thinking a lot about being the oldest child in a family and what that means. And my guest today is one of 14 children, and her oldest sister is actually a genealogy colleague of mine. I have known her for years, and we have kind of been in the same industry events. And so when Bethany came to my attention, who is my guest today, I was curious to know how she became interested in family history when it's her oldest sister who's the family genealogist. Because there's almost always one in every family, but to have two in a family is really unique. And so, as Bethany shares her story, you'll kind of see the evolution of how she became involved in family history as well. Now, what does that have to do with cakes and cemeteries? Well, Bethany is known on Instagram as Betheny Cakes. Her name's spelled a little different, Betheny. Bethany Cakes. We'll put it in the show notes. She first came onto my radar a few years ago at the Roots Tech Genealogy Conference, where the cake boss did a judging of different family history themed cakes, and Bethany entered. Since then, her husband has built her a cake barn on their property where she teaches cake decorating classes, and she has a really lovely tie-in to cake and family history. She'll share a little bit about her obsession with cakes, as well as her equal obsession with cemeteries. We'll nerd out about that a little bit. Please enjoy my conversation with Betheny Tomseth. Well, Bethany, I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. You have a fascinating story, and I know pieces of it, but I'm excited to hear how you tell it. Why don't we start? Tell us about your family of origin, because you come from a pretty large family.
I do come from a large family, and it's funny because we come from California, so we were quite the oddity in California, but I come from a family of 14 children, and so it's really fascinating. And I think maybe that is kind of my fascination with family history, right? When you belong to something that special, and it just kind of really makes you think deeply about where you came from and who else you came from, maybe, because
Yeah.
they're just a really special group.
And where are you in order?
I'm like the ultimate middle child, number 8.
Okay. And is there, like, how old's the oldest? How old's the youngest?
So there's like a 21-year gap.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. So lots of different, like, probably experiences.
Yeah, lots of different generations
Yeah.
really in the same family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, as you were growing up, was family history a part of your family stories? What did that look like?
Yes, absolutely. I think what really kind of fascinated me the most was the family stories that my great aunt Edith would tell me. I didn't have any grandparents growing up that were around, but I had a great aunt Edith. And I feel really, really lucky to have had my great aunt Edith. And she was the half sister to my grandmother that passed away in childbirth to my father. But we did know her because my great aunt Edith loved her so much. And it was a really, really amazing love that you really could feel through her stories of her sister. She just adored her sister, and we got to know her that way.
Yeah. Was Edith older or younger than your grandma?
She was younger.
Okay.
Yeah.
So she, like, knew her from the time she was born
Yeah.
and had those stories.
Yeah.
I love that. That's amazing. And what a gift that she was willing to share those stories with you too, because not everybody, like, I think a lot of times when death or tragedy hits a family, everybody reacts differently. And sometimes people shut down or don't want to talk about it or want to keep it in the past because they don't want to face those emotions. So the fact that she was willing to share those stories is such a gift.
Yeah, that's so special. I love that you said that. And she did it so well too, and with so much love. And I think that really integrated in our family too and helped us to love each other and realize that we are so connected.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you have her modeling that example of love for a sibling, which
Absolutely.
is really what that was. Also kind of a substitute grandparent. So tell us, your grandparent situation growing up was a little different than most.
Yeah, so I've got 3 grandparents that are kind of perpetually in their 20s, right? They all died really young. So my grandmother's name is Mary, and her father's name is Omer. And he had just moved up to Idaho um, for the summer. And then in the fall, in October, he went on a hunting trip with his friends. One of them dropped him off and then did his mail route. And then 2 of them were with him. One of them split off, and then Omer and his friend were together, and they kind of went up a hill because they saw some deer up a hill. So they're kind of climbing this hill, and my grandfather's in front, and he turns back to his friend behind him and says, "Shh, I've got a deer in my sight." So the friend stays back a bit. He sees my grandfather go over the hill, and then he hears a gunshot. And in the account, in the newspaper account, it says that he didn't hear a second gunshot, so he went to investigate. Which I don't know in hunting if there's supposed to be a second gunshot or not, but that's why he went to go investigate. It says upon finding my grandfather on the floor, um, my grandfather said the word, "I fell, water." And the friend tried to administer first aid, realized, okay, well, he probably needs water. And so goes to find water. By the time he comes back, he's gone. Um, and that's the account. But it's a really interesting account because in the newspaper, there's something that kind of caught my eye and caught some of my cousin's eyes as well, and it never really settled in the family. So growing up, I didn't know this whole story. I didn't
Did you know
have
any
this.
of this story?
I did. It was kind of like family lore. It's like, okay, a hunter thought he was a deer, or he tripped and fell on his gun, or there's different accounts of
And
it.
was it Edith that shared? Because this is Edith's mother's first husband, right? Like,
Yes.
so it wasn't her father,
No.
but she had grown up with the story, and so
Yes.
she's the one who passed it on?
I don't think I heard it from Edith specifically. I probably heard it from my father or one of my siblings, but it was talked about. And then as I got older and as I got more into family history, I really, really wanted to know a little bit more about how this happened because nobody really knew what it was. And he was so young, so it's kind of, intriguing. And so I was at Roots Tech actually, and the way I really kind of dived into this was, the Find My Relative on Family Search. So I'm on that, and then I get a message. Well, I see a name, who's someone that was attending online, and the name was Jerry Waddups, and I was like, oh, okay, well, that's interesting. And it said he was my first cousin, like once removed. So it was a pretty recent relative. And I wonder if he knows something. And so I sent him a message. I'm like, this is my great grandfather. Does your family know anything about him? And then he sent a message pretty quickly back and said, yes, I do know about Omer. That story never settled right. And I don't think I told him the story in the message. So he immediately was like, that story never settled right with me. And then he said, "But my father loved his brother." And I'm like, "That's phrased really oddly." And so I got a hold of Jerry, my cousin, and Jerry is actually my great-grandfather's nephew, straight nephew.
Wow.
So it's a pretty close relation.
So Jerry's dad and your great-grandfather were brothers.
That's right.
Wow.
He never knew him, obviously. He
Okay,
was so
yeah.
young when he passed, but his father did know him, and he would tell him stories about Omer and how sad it was that he had passed. And he just kind of told him the story of, you know, they went hunting and he passed, and I met up with him because he actually works at a family history center. He was close by, and so I met up with him, and it was really, really neat meeting another Waddups. And, I said, "Did your dad think that anything was odd or fishy?" And he said, "No." He's like, "But I read the police inquest, and it didn't settle with me." And I'm like, "I've been trying to find this police inquest. Do you know?" And he's like, "No, I had seen it online somewhere, and I cannot for the life of me find it." So what I did was I called the county recorder's office in Idaho where the incident happened. And person that handles the records, she says, I explained the whole situation and she's like, "No, we don't have records that date back to 1921." She goes, "But there is a old newspaper that's been around from the 1800s in the area, and I bet you they have an article." And then she goes, "And then call me back." She was very invested.
She wanted to know the rest of the
Yeah.
story.
And so I did call the newspaper article, and within 10 minutes, I had the newspaper article on my phone. It was fascinating. And reading the article really kind of made it more intriguing because what the article said.
Yeah.
And so I can read a little bit
I
of
would
the
love
article if
that.
you want. It said, at the inquest held Tuesday morning, it developed that Waddups evidently slipped and fell, and in doing so, the gun was thrown behind him. When it was discharged, the bullet entered the back of the right shoulder and came out through the chest. So that really, really intrigued me and made this whole story even more interesting.
Yeah.
And we were trying to like reenact how a weapon would fly, and it's a rifle, right?
Yeah.
So
Like
it's a
it's a
long,
hunting rifle. Yeah.
yeah, it's a long weapon. We were trying to figure out how it could slip behind somebody and then
Shoot them.
discharge this way,
Yeah.
like because it's going upward this
Mhm.
way. And we could not figure it out. And also, he had just gotten back from World War One. He was a soldier, and so he knew his weaponry.
He knew how to handle a gun.
Yeah. And so it's just interesting.
Yeah.
And nobody really knows.
Yeah.
And so it's, I think, going to be a mystery forever.
Oh, wow. And this story, like, again, you're raised with this story, kind of knowing pieces of it, but you finally reached a point where you were like, I want to know more,
Yeah.
and went diving into it. And the newspaper is really what kind of brought the full picture, and Jerry and his stories.
Yeah.
I love
Yeah.
that. So, your grandmother, how old was she when her father died?
She was 9 months old.
And is she his only child?
She was his only child.
Wow.
Yeah. We had
Okay.
just moved up there.
And
So
so then your great grandmother remarries and has how many more kids?
one more.
So,
My great aunt Edith. Yeah.
that's it.
Yeah. I just took my daughter to my grandma Mary's grave, and you go back there and you just realize how hard she had it. This great grandmother artist. And it's when you go to the cemetery, I'm imagining artists standing at that cemetery
Yeah.
and her daughter's grave.
Got it.
And then 11 months later, her son-in-law
Mm.
is right next to her. And
Goodness.
so
So artists lost like 4 family members. She lost her first husband, then she loses her daughter and her husband, and, like, that's a lot of
She
death.
goes through the World War I, she goes through the Great Depression,
Yeah.
and then her daughter dies, and then she goes through World War II. It's
That's
tragic,
a lot. That's
but
a lot.
I mean, through all that, she was known for being a very loving and kind woman.
Yeah. So her daughter Mary, did she die in childbirth with your dad?
She did,
Wow. And
yeah,
how many children did she have before
just the
that?
one.
So that's
So
2 generations of single children.
2 generations, single children, very, very young deaths.
Yeah.
But the really, really beautiful thing is that Mary had my father. My father went on to have 14 children.
Yeah. Right?
And I think that is really amazing.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
That's incredible. So after you, like, found that article, was there more? Like, did you find more of the story at any point?
No, I didn't find any more of the story, but I did wonder some more because I realized that his grave is in Ogden, Utah. And his whole family's from Bountiful. As I'm doing more research, as I'm learning more about him, because that's what I really wanted was to get to know him, because we're not how we die, right? I really wanted to to know who he was. And so that's why I started contacting family members and things like that. And one of the things that really intrigued me was that after he died, because they had just moved up to Idaho the summer before, but after he died, Artis, his wife, brought him back to Ogden, Utah. His whole family's from Bountiful. And so that made me wonder, why is he buried here? Why did she if she was already bringing his body to Utah, why not go a couple more miles to Bountiful, where the rest of his family is? And so on a whim, one day, it was actually his birthday, I'm like, I'm gonna go. I've never visited his headstone. And so I'm gonna take a little road trip and go up to Ogden. And it is a beautiful cemetery. I have never been there, and it was gorgeous and really big. There's like streets within the cemetery. And so I found his headstone and, just had a little moment there. And then I went home. And then a little shortly after I went home, I realized, oh my goodness, my ancestor that immigrated from Scotland is also buried in that same cemetery.
Same side of the family?
On Artis's side.
Oh, okay.
And so and I didn't really kind of make that connection just yet until I actually physically went up there. And I think this is why it's so important to go to the cemetery. I love cemeteries. I think people think I'm weird when I say that, but I think they're just so full of stories and people, and it's fascinating to me. So, oh, my sister is having a birthday party, so one of my sisters is flying in, and she's like, "Well, what are we gonna do when I go up there?" She is so fun, and she always wants to have a good time. She hates sitting around, and I'm like, "Melissa, I'm not a fun person. I am a homebody, and I love staying here. I don't know what to do." And so she's like, "Okay, well, think of something and then call me back." And I'm like, "Okay, okay." And so I call her back, and I'm like, "Melissa, I've got it. I know what we're gonna do, and I'm really excited." She's like, "Okay, what?" I said, "I'm gonna take you to a cemetery." And she's like, "Okay." A little pause. "Okay, sure." And so, um, she comes and we get in the car. I'm like, "Hey, we're going for a road trip." And as we're driving, I'm telling her all these stories. And she is just listening and listening. And she stops me at one point, probably halfway through, and she just looks at me and she goes, "How do you know all of this?" And I'm like, "Well, I have this habit of just going down rabbit holes and reading articles and, going through that memories tab and just, anything that anybody posts on there. It's just fascinating for me to just really understand what their lives were like and how they lived and of course, my sister as well. My sister is Rebecca Whitman Coford, and she is a lecturer at Ritz Tech, and she's a certified genealogist, and she has a lot of titles in genealogy. She's amazing, but she's told me a lot of stories as well. So I knew a lot of those stories from her as well. And so we're going up to the cemetery, and I said, "Okay, this is our immigrant ancestor from Scotland, and he's buried up there, so we're gonna get to see him. We're also gonna get to see Omer, and we're gonna get to see," and actually, that was all I knew. And so we're driving up there, and this was really neat to experience with my sister. So we get to the cemetery. I take her straight to Omer's headstone. And then we're looking, there's an online plat map. So we're looking through that for the name William Nicole Fife. And I'm named after William Nicole Fife. Nicole is a surname of his mother. And so Nicole is my middle name. And so we're walking through, and as we're walking towards his grave, there's Fife, 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 Fife. They're everywhere. They're all over that cemetery. And it was really surprising to me that there were so many Fifes in the cemetery. I never knew. And as we're walking, we come up to a really beautiful stone bench. And on the back of the stone bench is engraved Fife, really big, and it's beautiful. So we walk around to the front of the bench. And this was a man who had died in 1980. And I immediately recognized this engraving of a Scottish thistle. I knew exactly what it was. And it just really hit me that that Scottish heritage from the late 1800s was passed down from generation to generation so strongly, in fact, that they engraved a Scottish thistle on their headstone. And I'm named after that ancestor. My brother's named after that ancestor. And it was really an amazing look at that family dynamic. They loved their ancestry. They loved each other enough to all meet there before they move on. And it was really, really fascinating to me. So again, we're looking at the plot map after we find William Nicole Fife, and we see another name that I really did not expect to see, and the name was Cynthia Fife. Cynthia was William's third wife, and I had no idea that she was buried up there, but I knew the name, and so she was buried right next to Omer. So
What?
I think what happened was Artis brought her husband to lay next to her beloved grandmother because Artis was 11 when her grandmother died.
Mm.
And I thought that was a really neat family dynamic. So she just brought him back to her family.
To her family.
Mhm.
Yeah. And in that place, like I love cemeteries too. They're they are like part park, part
Yes.
meditation garden, part like and the stories, like every tombstone tells a story. The placement of the tombstones tells a story. And so the fact that you caught that and made those connections, I think is just beautiful.
It's like a beautiful reunion there.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is. Absolutely. Did Melissa get on board with it finally?
Oh, absolutely. It's funny. My other sister calls me. I have 7 sisters. So I'm talking to my other sister on the phone, and she says, "Bethany, Melissa said you took her to a cemetery." I'm like, "Yeah, I did." And then she says, "And she told me that is the most fun she's ever had at a cemetery in her life. And I said, yes, that's
Good.
what I was going for.
You did your job.
Yes.
Well, I love that. So you have these grandparents on your dad's side. So Mary and Omer and Artis were her parents. And then did Mary's husband also die young? Or was that the one grandparent that you knew?
That's the one that died 11 months after
That's right.
Mary had passed.
That's right.
They say he died of a broken heart. It was rheumatic heart disease. But I think after she died, he kind of worked himself, you know, too much. And he was
Trying to run away
already,
from his grief.
I think so. I think so. And I think he was already kind of ill health. But after she died, he just kind of worked and worked to kind of, yeah, like you said, kind of probably run away from it. And I think I've heard a story of my great grandmother Artis telling him, John, if you don't, slow down and rest, your son's not gonna have a parent. And he says, he'll be okay. And he was.
So
My
who raised your father?
artist did. Yeah. Can you imagine? But going back to the cemetery, the reason I knew that name was because of my sister Rebecca, the genealogist. It was Christmas. One Christmas, she sent me a present, and she's like, I'm sending you an early present. You need to call me when you get it. And I'm like, okay. She goes, I said, well, tell me what it is. Because I was so excited. I love presents. And she's like, well, I will tell you that it's very, very old. I'm like, okay, great. I love old stuff. So I get the package, and I tell you, she did not prepare me properly. Because I get the package and I open it up and I immediately just dissolve into tears. It was that special. What I saw was a framed, handwritten original recipe. And the reason that it was so special was because it was for lemon cake. And I make cakes.
You do?
I teach people how to make cakes. And cakes are very, very special to me. They're just such a great anchoring point for family gatherings and celebrations and connection. And so when I saw cake on that recipe, I just lost it. And then I learned she was my third great grandmother. And of course, my genealogist sister wrote a whole story on the back of it. So I know exactly who she is and her story. And of course, I went down the rabbit hole for her and her husband as well. And her husband was William Nicol Fife, the Scottish ancestor.
Okay.
And so it was a really, really special recipe.
That's amazing. And you brought it?
I did bring
I
it.
want to see.
Okay. Okay, there it is.
Oh,
Isn't it
look at
beautifully
this.
preserved?
Oh my goodness. In original handwriting
Original handwriting.
with like even scratch outs and all sorts of things.
I think that's
and remind me who this is?
This is Cynthia Fife,
Cynthia. So this is Artis's mother?
Artis's grandmother,
Artis's
who she buried her husband next to.
Okay.
Yes. And yeah, I like that you said the scratch outs. Scratch outs and notes. This one says, so there's lemon cake and then there's cookies. It says cookies, good. They're good cookies. I love it. And this was really amazing to see because it also kind of let me into her life a little bit. Like it brought me back into that time period. Like I make cakes. How did she make cakes? And why would she make cakes? Like obviously, I think cake back then was also a source of gathering and connection. I would suspect that this would be served at tea time or like special occasions. Like they did birthday cakes for birthdays back then. And so it was really, really special. Just imagining her making it and making it in those big ovens. They really have like know these ovens. Like and they have to know their equipment, they have to know their baking tins, they have to. And I mean, this recipe says separate the whites and you beat the whites. And like she had to beat those by hand.
Yeah, no electric mixer for her.
Yeah.
So tell me how did Rebecca find this?
So this was in a book, and this book was like from a pharmacy or apothecary, and then she was able to like fill in recipes because it says right there home recipes and and so I don't know how she came in possession of this book, but what she did was she separated some of the pages of the really amazing recipes and she sent them out to all of my sisters, and they're just so special.
There was something written on the back.
There is.
I need to read this. handwritten recipes by Cynthia Abbott Fife in an original published volume of the Household Encyclopedia and Practical Home Physician, a manual of useful information on all subjects relating to etiquette, cookery, domestic economy, family medicine, and hygiene. That's the longest book title ever. By Mrs. Beaton and A.L. James. Book in poor condition without cover, stamped and inscribed Cynthia Fife, compliments of Browning Grocery Cash Store in Ogden, Utah, held in 2013 by Mrs. Fife's fourth great-granddaughter, Rebecca Whitman Coford.
She's a professional. And I looked up that address. I looked up the name of that,
Uh-huh.
and it's no longer there.
Oh, of the grocery store
Yes.
where she
Yes,
got it from.
obviously.
I love that she got this, and then she just wrote in the pages.
Yeah.
And this recipe was on page 440.
Look at that.
So, like, that was a big book.
Yeah.
How fast after you opened this package and cried and talked to Rebecca did you bake the cake?
Immediately. And so it turns out, and I love tasting it because it kind of brings me back to what I would think that time period would be like. It's a really dense crumble texture, like a pound cake,
Yeah.
kind of. Not super sweet, even though it has like 3 cups of sugar in it. But it's not super sweet. It's like lemon scented. It's just really, really beautiful.
That's amazing. And you have made it beautifully.
I made it, yeah. And this is probably the form that it probably would have taken in just like a tin like this, a round tin like this. Another form could have been bundt pans too. So I made it in a bundt pan. And it's just so fun to kind of walk in her shoes or be in her kitchen.
Well, I love that you have this recipe, and I love that cakes are such an important part of your life. Like,
Yes.
what does that mean to you?
So my sister would make cakes, and it was really, really special. But I just remember a very poignant memory when I was in my teens. I was probably 16 or 17, and I'm just in the middle of all my teenage angst, right? I'm thinking, oh, nobody loves me. You're in a really big family, so you kind of feel lost a bit sometimes, right? But when it was our birthday, I just remember specifically sitting down at the table, and then all my family comes around the table, and they clap, and they sing, and they cheer just for you. And for someone that's a middle of 14 children, that really makes you feel loved and special and connected, right? And I love that cake does that for people. And I love the look on people's faces when I hand them a cake. And it's such a beautiful thing, I think.
Yeah, I love that. Well, you've been on this amazing family history journey. I'm sure there are more to come. But as you think about kind of the future, what is it that you hope for the future?
I really hope that people make family history now, right? I hope that they make those connections, and I hope that they make those memories now, whether they're gathered around food or not. you know, I think leaving a legacy of love and connection is the best gift you can give your posterity.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for sharing your ancestors. Thank you for sharing your cake. I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Studio sponsored by Ancestry.